Jake Morrison stood in the center of the great chamber and looked up at the alien faces staring down at him. The Galactic Council had built this place to make visitors feel small, and he had to admit it worked well. Hundreds of different species sat in curved rows that went up and up until they disappeared in shadow. Some had multiple eyes, others had no eyes at all, and a few glowed with their own light in the dim space. The trial had gone on for 3 months now, and Jake knew how it would end before it started. The humans had made too many enemies and not enough friends. When the Xerion pirates attacked the trade routes 2 years ago, humanity responded with tactics that worked but scared everyone else. When the Helix Nebula crisis happened 6 months later, human ships did things that no other species would even think about trying. Speaker Vextar rose from his crystal throne at the center of the highest platform. The Zephyrian was 12 feet, tall and made of what looked like living diamond that caught the chamber lights and threw rainbows across the walls. His voice came out in perfect council standard, but Jake could hear the cold satisfaction behind the words. The charges were read, again, even though everyone already knew them by heart. Excessive militarization was the first one. Humanity had built too many warships and armed them too well. Dangerous unpredictability was the second charge. Human commanders made decisions that other species could not understand or predict. The third charge was the worst one because it was also the most true. Humanity showed contempt for established protocols and procedures. Jake listened to it all without moving a muscle in his face. Behind him, Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood at perfect attention in her dress uniform. She had commanded a destroyer during the Xerion campaign and earned 3 medals for bravery. Her crew loved her, and enemy pirates feared her, but none of that mattered now. The Council had decided that human military success was actually human military excess. When Speaker Vextar called for the vote, Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it happen was different from expecting it. The voting display lit up across the chamber walls, showing each species' decision in real time. Green lights for guilty, red lights for innocent, yellow lights for abstaining. The green lights came fast and steady. The Altarian Consortium voted guilty, and their light turned green. The Balerian Trade Federation followed them. The Draconian Merchant Guild added their green light to the growing total. Species after species sided against humanity until the chamber walls were mostly green with just a few scattered red and yellow dots. 847 species voted guilty. 12 voted innocent. 3 abstained from voting at all. Jake did the math in his head and knew that even if every abstention had been a vote for humanity, it would not have changed anything. The Council had spoken, and their voice was clear. Speaker Vextar announced the sentence with the same cold satisfaction he had used to read the charges. Humanity was expelled from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All human colonies, outside their home system, would be restricted to basic trade only. All technological exchange programs were terminated. All joint military operations would cease. All diplomatic immunity was revoked. The punishment was complete and total. Humanity would be cut off from galactic civilization like a diseased limb, being removed from a healthy body. Jake felt hundreds of alien eyes watching him and waiting for his response. They expected anger or threats or pleading or tears. Some species were probably hoping for a dramatic outburst that would prove their point about human unpredictability. Instead, Jake Morrison did something that made the chamber go completely silent. He simply nodded once and said he understood. He thanked the speaker for conducting a fair trial, even though they both knew it had been anything but fair. He formally accepted the council judgment on behalf of all humanity. He requested 1 standard month to complete the withdrawal of human personnel and assets from council space. The silence stretched on and on until it became uncomfortable. Alien delegates shifted in their seats and made small, nervous sounds. The Vorthak representative actually stood up as if he wanted to say something, but then sat back down. Even Speaker Vextar seemed surprised by the lack of drama. Jake Morrison turned away from the judgment platform and walked toward the chamber exit, with Captain Rodriguez beside him. Their footsteps echoed in the huge space, but no one spoke until they reached the doors. Then Jake stopped and turned back to address the council one final time. He told them that humanity had learned much during their time as council members. He said that humans respected the decision even if they disagreed with it. He promised that all human withdrawals would be conducted in an orderly fashion with full cooperation. He wished the council peace and prosperity in all their future endeavors. Then Ambassador Jake Morrison and Captain Lisa Rodriguez walked out of the Galactic Council chamber for the last time. Behind them, 847 species sat in silence and wondered why they suddenly felt like they had made a terrible mistake. Admiral Rick Hayes stood on the observation deck of Titan Station and watched another transport ship disappear into hyperspace. The massive cargo vessel had been loaded with equipment from the human research labs and was now heading back toward Earth along with everything else humanity had built in Council space. 3 weeks had passed since the expulsion, and the evacuation was ahead of schedule. The station felt different now, with half the human sections already empty. Corridors that once buzzed with activity echoed with the sounds of packing crews and cargo loaders. The shopping district had closed down after the human businesses pulled out and took their customers with them. Even the alien-run establishments were struggling because humans had made up 40% of the station population. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Amy Collins was overseeing the most delicate part of the withdrawal process. As head of the Joint Research Initiative, she had access to some of the most advanced scientific data in Council space. Human researchers had contributed to projects ranging from faster-than-light communication to new surgical techniques, and all of that knowledge had to come with them. The Zephyrian scientists working with her team looked increasingly desperate as each data core was wiped clean and removed from the shared networks. Dr. Sevlin had spent 5 years working on quantum tunneling. Experiments with human physicists and their breakthrough had been just months away. Now she watched helplessly as Amy deleted files that represented half a decade of collaborative research. Amy felt genuinely sorry for her alien colleagues, but the Council decision had been clear about technological exchanges. If humanity was too dangerous to remain in the Council, then human knowledge was too dangerous to leave behind. She personally formatted each drive and made sure that no trace of human innovation remained in the shared databases. The economic impact was already spreading across multiple systems. The Balerian Trade Federation had called 3 emergency meetings in the past week, trying to figure out how to replace human freight operations. Human cargo ships had handled 23% of all interstellar shipping, and their withdrawal was causing delays and shortages throughout Council space. Captain Ben Parker was dealing with a different kind of problem on the far edge of human patrol territory. His ship, the Steadfast, was the last human military vessel in the Outer Rim sector, and he was supposed to hand over patrol duties to Council forces. The problem was that no Council forces had arrived to take over, and pirate activity was already increasing. His communications officer, Lieutenant Kate Murphy, reported 3 more merchant vessels requesting escort through the Broken Worlds region. The area had been peaceful for 2 years thanks to regular human patrols, but the pirates were testing the waters now that human ships were leaving. Ben wanted to help, but his orders were specific about avoiding any new engagements. The mining operation on asteroid 7749 was shutting down after 8 years of profitable extraction. The facility supplied rare Earth elements to dozens of Council species and employed over 3,000 workers from 15 different worlds. Human engineers had designed the extraction systems, and human managers had kept everything running smoothly, but now it was all being packed up and shipped away. Foreman Dale Cooper walked through the empty processing centers and tried not to think about what would happen to his alien workers. The Council had promised to find them new jobs, but everyone knew that was just talk. Most of them had families living in the company housing and nowhere else to go. Dale had asked permission to leave some equipment behind, but headquarters said no exceptions. The strangest thing about the human withdrawal was how completely professional it remained. Alien observers expected sabotage, or at least some kind of spite, but instead they got detailed handover documentation and comprehensive training programs. Human technicians spent extra hours making sure their replacements understood every system before they left. Dr. Patricia Lee finished her last surgery at the Council General Hospital and handed her patient files to the Altarian doctor who would be taking over. She had saved over 2,000 lives during her 5 years at the hospital and trained dozens of alien medical students in human surgical techniques. Now she was leaving and taking all her knowledge with her. The alien medical staff gathered in the break room to say goodbye, and several of them were clearly upset. Nurse Coordinator Velnus from the Draconian Medical Corps had worked with Patricia for 3 years and considered her a close friend. She begged Patricia to at least leave behind her surgical procedures manual, but Patricia explained that all human medical knowledge had to be withdrawn according to council orders. Transport ships arrived at human facilities across council space and loaded everything that could be moved. Equipment that was too large to transport got broken down into component parts. Installations that could not be removed were thoroughly cleaned of all human technology and handed over to local authorities with basic operating instructions. The final security briefing on Titan Station included representatives from 6 different council species who would be taking over station operations. Admiral Hayes went through every system and procedure with careful detail and answered hundreds of questions about maintenance schedules and emergency protocols. When they asked why humans were being so helpful with the handover, he simply said it was the right thing to do. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating the evacuation of human diplomatic personnel from 12 different worlds. Embassy staff packed up classified documents and destroyed sensitive communication equipment while alien government officials watched nervously. Some worlds had relied heavily on human diplomatic services and were already struggling to manage interspecies conflicts without human mediators. The last human civilian transport left Council space exactly 29 days after the expulsion order. The ship was overcrowded, and many passengers had to leave personal belongings behind, but everyone was accounted for. Behind them, they left empty buildings and abandoned facilities, but no bitterness and no sabotage. As the final human vessels disappeared into hyperspace, several alien species were beginning to realize what they had lost. The smooth operation of Council space had depended on human efficiency and innovation in ways that most species had never fully understood. Now they were about to find out what life looked like without human involvement, and many of them were starting to worry about what they would discover. The first signs of trouble appeared exactly 63 days after the last human ship left Council space. Long-range sensors detected a massive fleet movement in the Zarion pirate territories, and Admiral Corvin of the Altarian Defense Force knew immediately that something was very wrong. The pirates had never assembled this many ships before, and they were heading straight for the heavily traveled Nexus trade route. Corvin tried to coordinate a response with the other Council military forces, but quickly discovered that without human communication protocols, the different fleets could barely talk to each other. Altarian ships used quantum burst transmissions, while Draconian vessels relied on subspace frequencies that interfered with Zephyrian crystal resonance networks. The humans had somehow made all these incompatible systems work together, but no one had bothered to learn how they did it. The pirate attack came in 3 waves and caught the scattered Council forces completely off guard. Zarion raiders used hit-and-run tactics that the humans had warned about years earlier, but which traditional Council military doctrine was not designed to counter. By the time Admiral Corvin managed to organize a proper response, the pirates had already destroyed 6 merchant convoys and captured 2 mining platforms. On the medical front, Dr. Sevlin was dealing with her own crisis on the farming colonies of Kepler 442b. A plague outbreak that should have been contained within hours was spreading rapidly because the emergency response system kept breaking down. The human-designed logistics network had automatically rerouted supplies and personnel to crisis areas. But the replacement Altarian system required manual coordination for every single decision. Dr. Sevlin found herself trying to manage medical supply chains that she did not fully understand, while colonists died from a disease that human protocols could have stopped in the first day. The treatment was simple, and the vaccines were readily available, but getting them to the right places at the right time had become almost impossible without human oversight. The traffic control situation on the Nexus trade route was getting worse every day. Engineer Alan Foster had designed a system that managed over 10,000 ship movements per day through the busiest shipping lane in Council space. His replacement, a competent Balerian technician named Fluxitar, was struggling to handle even half that volume without causing dangerous collisions. Ships that once moved through the route in smooth, coordinated streams now faced hours of delays as the simplified alien replacement system tried to process movement requests one at a time. Cargo companies were complaining about missed delivery schedules, and some were starting to look for alternate routes that added weeks to their journey times. The Krillian Empire was having problems of their own on their contested border with the hegemony. For the past 5 years, human diplomatic observers had been quietly preventing minor incidents from escalating into serious conflicts. The human observers never took sides and rarely made official statements, but somehow their presence had kept two hostile military forces from actually shooting at each other. Without that human buffer zone, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Hegemony patrol ships began testing Krillian response times, and Krillian commanders started making increasingly aggressive moves to show strength. Within 2 months, 3 separate skirmishes broke out, and both sides began mobilizing additional forces for what looked like a serious border war. Commander Helen Morris monitored the developing crisis from the hidden human observation post beyond the galactic rim. Her orders were strict about maintaining communication silence, but she was allowed to gather intelligence on Council space activities. The reports she sent back to human leadership painted a picture of rapidly spreading chaos and system failures. The Balerian Trade Federation held another emergency session to discuss the shipping crisis. Delegate Coruscant stood before his colleagues and presented charts showing how badly commerce had declined since the human departure. Shipping costs were up 40%, delivery times had doubled, and customer satisfaction ratings had fallen to historic lows. Several Balerian companies were threatening to suspend operations entirely if the situation did not improve soon. The replacement logistics network was simply too slow and inefficient to handle modern interstellar commerce demands. Some delegates suggested hiring private human companies to resume freight operations, but others pointed out that humans were now forbidden from working in Council space. The medical emergency on Kepler 442b finally came under control after 6 weeks of struggle and over 2,000 preventable deaths. Dr. Sevlin submitted her after-action report to the Council Medical Authority and did not try to hide her frustration with the failed response systems. She specifically noted that human emergency protocols would have contained the outbreak in less than 48 hours. Speaker Vextar received complaint reports from over 30 different council members during the emergency session called to address the growing problems. The Draconian representative questioned why proper transition protocols had not been followed during the human withdrawal. The Vorthak delegate demanded to know who was responsible for the shipping crisis. Even some species that had voted for human expulsion were now asking uncomfortable questions. The Xerion pirates launched their second major offensive 3 months after their initial success, and this time they targeted Council military installations directly. Without human rapid response capabilities, the various alien fleets took too long to coordinate their defense and lost 2 orbital defense platforms before finally driving off the attackers. Admiral Corvin filed a classified report stating that Council military effectiveness had decreased by over 60% since the human departure. Traditional alien military tactics simply did not work against the unconventional warfare methods that pirates and other non-state actors were now using. The humans had somehow learned to fight these enemies effectively, but had taken that knowledge with them when they left. Engineering failures began cascading through multiple systems as human-designed networks started breaking down without proper maintenance. The traffic control system suffered 3 major crashes in 1 week. The medical supply network routed vaccines to the wrong planets twice. Communication relays that had worked perfectly for years suddenly began experiencing mysterious interference problems. The most troubling aspect of the growing crisis was that nobody seemed to understand how human systems had actually worked. Alien technicians could operate the equipment and follow the procedures, but they did not grasp the underlying principles that made everything function smoothly. It was like trying to fix a watch when you only understood what the hands were supposed to do. Captain Ben Parker watched the deteriorating situation from his new assignment in human space and felt genuinely sorry for his former alien colleagues. The humans had tried to share their knowledge and methods, but most council species had been too proud or suspicious to pay attention. Now they were learning the hard way that human contributions to galactic civilization had been far more important than anyone realized. The council chambers that had once buzzed with confident discussion now echoed with worried arguments and desperate proposals. Species that had voted enthusiastically for human expulsion were beginning to wonder if they had made the biggest mistake in council history. Ambassador Carlos Rivera stood before the emergency council session and knew that his report would change everything. 6 months had passed since the human expulsion, and council space was falling apart faster than anyone had imagined possible. The data in his hands painted a picture of systematic failure across every major sector of galactic civilization. The Xerian Pirate War, as the media had started calling it, had claimed over 200,000 civilian lives and showed no signs of slowing down. Traditional council military responses that had worked against conventional enemies proved useless against the hit-and-run tactics that pirates were now using throughout the outer territories. Worse still, the pirates seemed to be learning from human military techniques, even though humans were no longer present to teach them. Carlos began his presentation with the economic data because the numbers spoke for themselves. Economic productivity across council space had dropped by 31%. Shipping delays had increased average delivery times by 127%. Customer satisfaction ratings for essential services had fallen to levels not seen since the early days of the council formation. The medical statistics were even more devastating. Emergency response times had increased by an average of 127% across all member worlds. Preventable deaths from treatable diseases had increased by over 300%. The sophisticated medical logistics network that humans had designed and maintained was simply too complex for other species to operate effectively. Military effectiveness numbers made for the most sobering reading of all. Council forces had suffered a 67% decrease in operational capability against non-state actors like pirates and terrorists. Traditional alien military doctrine emphasized large fleet actions between organized governments but human. Advisors had taught council forces how to fight irregular warfare. That knowledge had departed along with the humans. Speaker Vextar listened to the report in growing dismay and knew that his political career was probably over. He had been the primary advocate for human expulsion and had assured the council that other species could easily replace human contributions to galactic civilization. The data Carlos was presenting proved beyond doubt that this assumption had been catastrophically wrong. The Altarian Consortium delegate rose to make the first formal proposal of the session. Ambassador Lyradel suggested that the Council immediately rescind the expulsion order and invite humanity back with full honors and expanded privileges. She pointed out that human dignity during the withdrawal process had proven that the charges against them were based more on fear than fact. The Vorthak Federation delegate seconded the proposal and shared classified intelligence reports about ecological disasters that human early warning systems had prevented. 17 separate potential catastrophes had been stopped by human monitoring networks in Vorthak space alone. Without those systems in place, the Federation was facing environmental crises that could affect billions of lives. However, the political Situation was more complex than simply admitting error and asking humans to return. The Krillian Empire still opposed any human involvement in council affairs, despite facing their own border crisis with the hegemony. Several smaller species worried that reversing the expulsion would make the council look weak and indecisive. To potential enemies, the Zephyrian Collective proposed a face-saving compromise that would invite humans back as technical consultants rather than full council members. This would allow human expertise to return to council space without requiring the embarrassing admission that the expulsion had been a complete mistake. Speaker Vextar found himself supporting this proposal despite knowing it was inadequate. The debate continued for hours as different species tried to balance their desperate need for human assistance against their political pride and fear of appearing foolish. Some delegates argued that humans might refuse to return after being treated so badly. Others worried that humanity would demand concessions or reparations that the council could not afford to pay. During a recess, Ambassador Rivera spoke privately with several key delegates about intelligence reports that were even more disturbing than the public data. Long-range sensors had detected unusual activity in human space, but all attempts to establish communication had been met with complete silence. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations reported that all normal traffic patterns between human worlds had ceased. No merchant vessels, no diplomatic ships, no military patrols, nothing at all was moving in or out of human territory. Even more puzzling was the fact that human colonies were not responding to standard communication protocols from any source. The implications were terrifying to consider. If humans had simply withdrawn from galactic affairs, that was one thing, but if something had happened to them, then the Council might be facing threats they did not even know existed. The possibility that humanity had been destroyed or conquered by unknown enemies made several delegates visibly nervous. Captain Rodriguez now commanded the human intelligence vessel Shadow Walker from a hidden base beyond the galactic rim and monitored Council communications with growing amusement. The panic in alien government channels was becoming more obvious every day as the reality of human absence became clear. Her orders were to observe and report, but not to make contact under any circumstances. The Great Withdrawal, as humans now called it, had been far more comprehensive than any of the alien species realized. Every human settlement, every orbital station, every deep space outpost had been relocated to new territories beyond Council space. The logistics involved were staggering and had required planning that began years before the actual expulsion. President Marcus Johnson reviewed the Council intelligence reports from his office on New Geneva and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Humanity had spent decades trying to work within Council systems and had been rewarded with suspicion and ultimately expulsion. Now the same species that had rejected human participation were begging for human assistance. The final vote on the human return proposal took place after 2 days of bitter debate. The result was inconclusive, with no clear majority for any single option. Some species wanted full restoration of human membership, others preferred limited technical consultation, and a stubborn minority still opposed any human involvement at all. Speaker Vextar was forced to table the motion and schedule another session for the following month. In the meantime, Council space continued to deteriorate as essential systems failed and military defeats mounted. The Xerion pirates had grown bold enough to attack major shipping hubs, and the Council fleet seemed powerless to stop them. Dr. Patricia Lee monitored the medical crisis reports from her new research facility in human space and tried not to think about the lives being lost due to failed emergency response systems. She had spent years training alien medical personnel in human procedures, but apparently not enough of them had been paying attention to maintain the networks after human departure. The session ended with Speaker Vexatar making a formal broadcast toward human space, requesting immediate contact for urgent negotiations. The message was transmitted on all frequencies and repeated in every known human language. It contained formal apologies for the expulsion and desperate pleas for human assistance with the growing crisis. The response came exactly 48 hours later in the form of complete radio silence. Human space remained as quiet as it had been since the day the last human ship crossed the boundary. Whatever humanity was doing out there, they were clearly not interested in council communications or council problems anymore. Admiral Corvin commanded the largest search fleet in council history as it approached the edge of human space 8 months after the expulsion. The task force included representatives from 6 different species and carried enough diplomatic authority to negotiate humanity's immediate return to the council with whatever terms they demanded. What they found when they reached the Sol system changed everything the council thought they knew about their former members. The system was completely empty of human presence. Every orbital station had vanished without a trace. The massive shipyards around Jupiter that had built human fleets for 3 decades showed no signs of ever having existed. Even the ancient space elevator that connected Earth to its orbital ring was simply gone, as if it had never been built. Dr. Sevlin operated the most advanced sensors in the fleet from her position aboard the Altarian research vessel. Her instruments detected no artificial structures anywhere in the system, despite knowing that millions of humans had lived and worked in orbital habitats just months earlier. The level of cleanup was so complete that she began to doubt her own records. The landing team that descended to Earth found a world that looked completely natural despite having supported a population of 8 billion humans for centuries. Cities had been removed so thoroughly that not even foundation traces remained. Agricultural areas had been restored to original ecosystems. Industrial sites showed no evidence of ever having been disturbed. Captain Helen Morris watched the council search party from her concealed position beyond the outer planets and marveled at their obvious confusion. The Phoenix Dawn was equipped with stealth technology that made it invisible to council sensors, but her crew could monitor everything the aliens were doing. Her orders remained the same as always: observe but do not engage under any circumstances. Search team spent 3 days on Earth trying to understand what they were seeing. Atmospheric readings showed that the biosphere was completely healthy with no trace of industrial pollution or urban development. Geological surveys found no evidence of mining or construction. It was as if humanity had never existed on their own homeworld. Commander Tony Graham had overseen the Earth restoration project from his base ship in the Centauri system and took pride in how completely his teams had erased every trace of human civilization. The work had taken 6 months and involved technologies that no council species knew humans possessed. Every building had been broken down to component atoms, and every ecosystem had been carefully restored to pre-industrial conditions. The most puzzling discovery came when the search team found a single message beacon in Earth orbit, programmed to activate only when council ships approached. The device was clearly of human construction, but used technologies that were decades ahead of anything humans had revealed during their council membership. The beacon itself was a clear message about capabilities that had been hidden. President Marcus Johnson appeared on the beacon recording looking calm and dignified despite the circumstances that had led to this moment. His message was brief and carefully worded to reveal nothing about human plans or current location. He simply stated that the council had made their choice and humanity respected that decision by finding a new path among the stars. The beacon. Data included just enough information to make the council search team realize how little they had actually known about human capabilities. Ship construction records showed vessels of previously unknown design. Population transfer logs indicated movement of over 800 billion people to unknown destinations. Technological specifications revealed capabilities far beyond what humans had ever demonstrated. Admiral Corvin found himself staring at evidence that humanity had been deliberately concealing their true technological level throughout their entire council membership. The ships that had evacuated human space were not the crude vessels that Council intelligence had catalogued, but sophisticated craft that could apparently relocate entire civilizations without being detected. Dr. Sevlin ran spectral analysis on the residual energy signatures left by human evacuation operations and discovered propulsion systems that should not have been possible with known physics. The humans had apparently developed faster-than-light travel methods that were completely different from standard Council technology. Her instruments could barely detect the traces they had left behind. The implications were staggering to consider. If humans had possessed such advanced technology, why had they pretended to be a relatively primitive species during their Council years? Why had they accepted limitations and restrictions that they could have easily ignored? Why had they maintained the pretense of being just another member species when they were clearly something much more advanced? The search expanded to other human colonies and found the same pattern everywhere. Complete evacuation with total cleanup, and no traces left behind. Installations that had housed millions of people showed no evidence of ever having been occupied. Mining operations that had extracted resources for decades looked like untouched natural formations. Commander Morris received regular updates from human intelligence networks throughout Council space and knew that the alien search efforts were causing panic in government circles. The discovery that humanity had been concealing their true capabilities was forcing Council leaders to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their former members. The most disturbing discovery came when the search fleet investigated the outer edge of human space and found defensive installations that had somehow escaped detection during years of Council monitoring. The structures were clearly designed to prevent unauthorized entry, and their technology levels were centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed. Captain Rodriguez commanded one of the hidden defense platforms and watched with professional interest as Council ships tried to probe the barrier systems. The aliens had no idea they were being observed and analyzed by sensors that could track individual atoms across interstellar distances. Human defensive technology had advanced far beyond anything they had ever revealed. The search fleet attempted to push beyond human space boundaries and discovered that their ships simply stopped working properly when they crossed certain invisible lines. Engines would malfunction, navigation systems would fail, and communication arrays would go offline until they retreated back to their original positions. The humans had somehow established a technological barrier that was completely impermeable. Admiral Corvin ordered his ships to attempt breakthrough at different coordinates, but found the same result every time. Whatever defensive grid humanity had established around their new territories was beyond Council understanding. Ships that tried to force passage through the barriers simply disappeared from sensors without leaving any trace of what had happened to them. The final report that Admiral Corvin transmitted back to the Council painted a picture of human capabilities that exceeded their worst fears and wildest imaginations. Humanity had not simply withdrawn from Council space, but had relocated their entire civilization to unknown territories using technology that made Council science look primitive by comparison. The search fleet returned to Council space with more questions than answers, and the growing realization that the species they had expelled was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. If humans could relocate billions of people and establish impenetrable defensive barriers without being detected, then what else were they capable of doing? Speaker Vexitar received the search reports in his private office and knew that the Council faced a crisis unlike anything in their recorded history. They had not simply lost a member species, but had apparently made an enemy of a civilization whose true power they were only beginning to understand. 1 year after the Expulsion Council space faced its greatest crisis in recorded history, and Speaker Vexitar knew that his political career was finished. The Xerion pirates had evolved from a minor nuisance into a military organization that controlled entire sectors, and their tactics seemed suspiciously advanced for a group of simple raiders. Economic networks continued collapsing without human coordination, and several member species were threatening to withdraw from the Council entirely. The hegemony had launched what they called a reconnaissance mission toward human space 3 months earlier, and the results were terrifying to consider. Their entire fleet of 12 ships had simply vanished, without sending a single transmission or leaving any debris. When they sent a lone messenger vessel to investigate what had happened, the ship returned with its crew in catatonic states and all data cores completely wiped clean. Dr. Patricia Lee reviewed the intelligence reports from her research facility on New Geneva and felt a mixture of sadness and professional satisfaction. The defensive grid that humanity had established around their new territories was performing exactly as designed. Non-hostile vessels were simply redirected away from human space without ever realizing what had happened, while aggressive intruders faced consequences that were carefully calibrated to their intentions. The grid used technology that was decades ahead of anything Council species possessed and had been under development since before humanity joined the galactic community. Human scientists had always known that peaceful coexistence with aliens would probably be temporary and had prepared accordingly. The expulsion had simply provided an excuse to activate systems that were already in place. Captain Rodriguez commanded. The monitoring station that had processed the hegemony intrusion and had followed standard protocols for dealing with hostile contact. The crews were left alive, but with their memories carefully edited to remove any useful intelligence about human defensive capabilities. Their ships were returned intact, but with all weapons and sensor systems permanently disabled. The Council held another emergency session to discuss what they were calling the human question, but the debate quickly devolved into finger-pointing and desperate proposals. Several species demanded immediate military action against human territories, while others insisted that diplomacy was the only viable option. A few delegates suggested that the Council should simply accept the situation and focus on solving their own problems. Speaker Vextar found himself in the impossible position of trying to lead a council that was falling apart while facing an unknown threat that might or might not be hostile. The humans had not attacked anyone or made any threatening statements, but their obvious technological superiority and complete silence was more frightening than open warfare would have been. The Krillian Empire was dealing with its own crisis, as their border war with the hegemony escalated beyond anything they could handle alone. Without human diplomatic observers to prevent incidents from escalating, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. Both sides were now mobilizing for total war, and other Council species were being forced to choose sides. Admiral Corvin submitted his resignation after the third major defeat of Council forces by Xerion pirates in as many months. His replacement, Admiral Fluxwin, inherited a military situation that was essentially hopeless without human coordination and rapid response capabilities. The pirates had somehow acquired advanced weapons and were using hit-and-run tactics that Council doctrine had no answer for. The economic data presented at the emergency session made for devastating reading. Trade volumes were down 50% from pre-expulsion levels. Shipping costs had increased by over 200%. Several major trade routes had been abandoned entirely due to pirate activity and system failures. Multiple species were facing economic collapse and social unrest. Dr. Sevlin presented her analysis of the medical crisis and tried to maintain professional composure while describing preventable deaths that numbered in the millions. The sophisticated emergency response networks that humans had designed were too complex for other species to maintain and were failing catastrophically across Council space. Entire worlds were facing medical emergencies that should have been easily manageable. The final desperate measure came when Speaker Vextar formally rescinded the expulsion order and offered humanity full restoration to Council membership with expanded privileges and formal apologies for the injustice they had suffered. The offer was broadcast on all frequencies toward human space and included promises of reparations and guaranteed representation on the Council Leadership Board. The response came not from human space, but from the edge of the galaxy itself, where long-range sensors detected a single vessel of unknown configuration approaching at impossible speeds. The ship ignored all communication attempts and broadcast a message on every frequency that Council monitoring stations could detect. Captain Tony Graham commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon and delivered humanity's final message to the Council with the same dignity that had characterized human behavior throughout the expulsion process. He thanked the Council for their belated offer, but explained that humanity had moved beyond the need for alien approval or participation in galactic politics. The message included enough technical data about human exploration beyond the galaxy to make Council scientists realize how completely they had misunderstood human capabilities. While Council species had spent centuries arguing about territory within their own galaxy, humans had been quietly preparing to explore entirely new regions of space that no other species had even detected. Humanity had discovered that the galaxy itself was just one small part of a much larger universe and had begun establishing colonies in star systems that were completely unknown to Council science. Their technology had advanced to the point where they could travel between galaxies as easily as Council ships moved between star systems. President Johnson appeared in the final portion of the message and spoke directly to the Council about lessons that both species had learned from their brief association. He pointed out that humanity had tried to work within Council systems for decades, but had been met with suspicion and ultimately rejection. The experience had taught humans that they were better off forging their own path through the cosmos. The message concluded with humanity wishing the Council well in their future endeavors, but making it clear that humans considered their association with galactic civilization to be permanently ended. There would be no return to Council space, and no further communication unless the Council faced existential threats that required human intervention for humanitarian reasons. Commander Morris monitored the aftermath of the message from her hidden observation post and watched Council space continue its slide toward chaos. The knowledge that humanity had essentially outgrown the need for galactic civilization was having profound psychological effects on alien populations. Many species were beginning to question whether their own advancement had stagnated. The story concluded with young Altarian students learning about what their teachers called the Great Silence in their history classes. Dr. Sevlin, who had once worked alongside human researchers, tried to explain to her students how a species could simply outgrow the need for the community that had once defined galactic civilization. The final lesson was that the Council's greatest mistake had been assuming that rejecting humanity would limit their potential rather than unleashing it completely. By forcing humans to leave Council space, the aliens had inadvertently freed them from the constraints of galactic politics and allowed them to achieve something far greater than anyone had imagined possible. Somewhere beyond the edge of known, space humanity was writing a new chapter of their story that would never again require permission or approval from anyone else. The cosmos had proven to be far larger than any Council species had realized, and humanity was exploring regions that made their old conflicts seem small and petty. The Council continued to struggle with problems that had once been easily manageable, while humanity explored territories that no other species knew existed. The greatest irony was that by trying to protect galactic civilization from human influence, the Council had instead lost the opportunity to be part of something truly extraordinary.